Right side contact. A blaring sound from my headset yanked me out of my sleep, accompanied by the gruff yell of a gunner that resonated ominously. Dust filled my mouth, and a stubborn crack echoed from my neck as I turned my head to gaze out the passenger side window of our worn-out semi-truck. A shadowy mass surged forward as dozens of massive figures trudged out from the trees a few hundred yards to my right, tearing through the dense, overgrown pastureland. The autumn sun was slipping below a cold, gray sky, barely lighting up the grimy glass. Reddish-brown mud caked onto dented metal, and rusted steel axles bent at strange angles to propel these creatures on all fours. There were over 20 of them, a larger herd than last month thanks to the scattered abandoned scrap littering this forgotten stretch of the Appalachian foothills. At their current speed, they'd reach us in mere minutes. "Lieutenant?" My driver and acting platoon sergeant, 17-year-old Tyler Davis, tightened his grip on the steering wheel of the battered tractor-trailer, his face paling as he watched the advancing horde. "What's our move? Should we take a side road and run?" The slight tremor in Tyler's voice gave away his preferred option, and I couldn't blame him. Like most of my team, Tyler hadn't even turned 16 and had spent the past several months sheltered within the safety of the Northern Military Zone. This was the first time our platoon faced so many anomalies at once, and I could feel the tension crackling through the static of my radio headset. I felt it too, the deep-seated fear and the surge of icy adrenaline urging me to flee as fast as our rattling vehicle could carry me. But the others are counting on us. "All units, battle stations," I commanded, clicking the radio mic so my voice could reach the entire convoy. "We've got Auto Stalkers at our 3 o'clock. Stay the course, we're pushing through." Alarm cries erupted from every vehicle, prompting every crew member to spring into action. Diesel engines roared to life, our speed surged forward, and the drivers floored their accelerators, sending black exhaust fumes billowing from each rig. Machine guns sprang up from their fortified positions on the trucks, but a sinking feeling settled in my gut as I realized how ineffective they were against the enemy. These mutants were resilient, difficult to take down with small arms, and easily spooked into a stampede like this one. From the corner of my eye, I watched them draw closer through the dirty haze of my window. The Auto Stalkers, crafted from a twisted blend of dilapidated cars and the dark influence of the breach, moved like water buffalo on all 4 axles, their tires flat against the ground like circular hooves. Cars, trucks, vans, and buses thundered along with the clanking and creaking of old metal, no drivers visible in their moldy interiors. Loose stones chipped their paint, grass clawed their grills, and the headlights burned with a fierce, animalistic glare. I needed to divert them from the road. My eyes shifted to the long flatbed trailers forming our little convoy, where today's precious cargo was secured with straps, chains, and ropes. Since we were driven out of our home in the new wilderness wildlife reserve by a rocket barrage, our focus had been on scavenging tools and equipment to replace what the missiles had destroyed. Arc welders, milling machines, metal lathes, anything to recreate the wonders of the old modern world, we hoarded like treasure. This morning had been a jackpot, a deserted tractor repair shop filled with old-school, non-digital tools, perfectly preserved. It took the entire day to load everything onto 4 salvaged lowboy trailers, and the worn-out semi-trucks pulling each were too slow for a quick escape. If the mutants caught us, they might crush us with sheer force, and the last thing I'd hear would be my crew's screams over the radio. "Call for backup and stay en route." I grabbed my Type 9 submachine gun from its place by my seat, patted Tyler on the shoulder, and climbed back through the truck's cab to where a back door opened onto the cargo deck. The wind whipped at my face the moment I stepped outside, my brown braids snapping in the breeze like a small flag behind me. For a split second, I froze, overwhelmed by a rush of sensations. It had only been a few months since a misguided blogging trip led me to the forgotten stretches of Barron County, Ohio, but in moments like these, it felt like an eternity. Sometimes, it was hard to believe the normal world I'd grown up in still existed somewhere out there, completely unaware that Ohio once had an 89th county, a missing piece of our world besieged by forces beyond our understanding. The mysterious phenomenon known as the breach had opened long before I arrived, spewing radiation and electromagnetic energy into our world, creating twisted monsters from both natural and man-made sources. Under relentless assault, our fragile modern system collapsed, and nearly 3/4 of the civilian population perished. Since then, the forces of New Wilderness struggled to hold back the nightmarish tide, all while locked in battle with a shadowy organization called ELSA, who sought to rule the county with an iron fist. My leisurely days of shooting urban exploration footage and checking social media were long gone. Now I carried a submachine gun everywhere and led ranger patrols into the overgrown no-man's land that was once normal countryside. It was a world so bizarre I wouldn't have believed it myself, but here I stood, memories flooding back in a cascade of wonder, anger, fear, pain, and determination. Crash. The trailer shook violently under my brown combat boots with a heavy impact, snapping me back to the present. "Drop the tire shields!" I shouted, both feet pounding the deck as I rushed to help the nearest crew member lower the sheet steel plates into position, our steps unsteady under the trailer's sway. Each iron plate slid into its welded frame with a solid clank, designed to protect our precious rubber tires from attack, and brass cartridge casings began to scatter across the trailer bed as more Rangers opened fire. Gunners moved back and forth across the crowded deck, supplying ammunition to machine gun mounts bolted onto the trailer's armored sides, while grenadiers climbed into high perches to rain explosives down on the wave of mutants. In the scrap metal barriers along the deckway, riflemen surged to the firing ports to bring their small arms to bear, and I moved to join them. "Aim for the legs!" I loaded my Type 9, flicked the safety off, and targeted the nearest Auto Stalker, a dented green sedan. "Hit their legs! Push them back!" Brat-tat-tat-tat-tat. The gun bucked in my hands, a familiar sensation by now, and sparks flew across the mutant's sheet metal hide as bullets pierced its front left leg. Hunk! With an irritated honk of its horn, the sedan swerved away from our truck, and the other Rangers beside me adjusted their aim similarly. One by one, the approaching freaks altered their path and soon matched our pace instead of charging into our convoy. Still, I kept firing with my team, knowing we couldn't stop until the creatures ceased their mad dash. Even for me, the task was challenging. Curtains of brown mud splashed from the neglected road, smearing across the trailer, and amidst the rattling chaos of the drive, it was all I could do to stay upright. The air tasted of damp rain, acidic diesel exhaust, and burned gunpowder, blending into a constant haze as we sped along. Wham! Our trailer emitted a jerky squeal from its rear tires, and I nearly fell, only catching myself by grabbing the parapet at the last moment. "Lieutenant, there's a big one on your tail!" Another driver shouted through the radio headsets many of us wore, electronic communication crucial in these situations. Sure enough, a heavily corroded red pickup truck rammed into the back of our rig with the force of an angry bull, one twisted end of its chrome front bumper hooking under our left side tire shield. The mutant wobbled, trying to shove the larger semi off the worn pavement, tearing metal with each thrash. "I've got him!" On a raised mount above the trailer bed, one of the other rangers grabbed a long spear from a rack next to his position, pulled a small metal pin from its tip, and threw it at the mutant. Kaboom! Fragments of hot shrapnel zipped through the air following the explosion, with wood, glass, and metal shattering under the grenade lance. A piece hissed by my right ear, and I instinctively ducked, but the mutated pickup continued, still locked in battle with our trailer's back end. Too much weight now rested on our right side tires, and I could taste the salty scent of burnt rubber on the back of my tongue as the brakes began to lock under the strain. The second truck in our convoy backed off to avoid more shrapnel, but this only slowed them down, and a churn in my stomach told me we were at a critical point. Either we dislodged that pickup, or our entire back section could catch fire, taking the convoy with it. I needed to get higher. Desperate, I lunged for the rear of our trailer, vaulted over old machine tools strapped down in large heaps, and didn't stop until I reached the rear gunner's perch. Each trailer was outfitted like a rolling fortress, not the most aerodynamic design, but sturdy enough to keep mutants from dragging our guys off the deck during encounters. Railings of sheet metal, old pipes, and angle iron line the ramparts, with small metal towers at the trailer's four corners serving as perches for our gunners. Grenadiers also shared these posts, giving them a higher vantage point to launch their homemade explosives, hence the grenade lances in their various racks. Honestly, the entire rig looked like something out of a demolition derby for the criminally insane, but it worked, at least when it wasn't being torn apart by a rogue Auto Stalker. Bounding to the base of the nearest perch, I glanced up just in time to see another lance streak downward as the red pickup slammed against the armored railing. Boom! An invisible force seemed to punch me in the chest, squeezing the wind from my lungs. Heat seared my left cheek, and I tumbled to the deck along with several others as the shockwave knocked us down like rag dolls. Pain flared in my shoulder as the wild roll across the old trailer stopped against a pile of salvaged tires, and I winced as the Type 9 dug into my ribs. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard my platoon's screams as truck number 2 slammed on its brakes to avoid the collision. Creak. Dazed, I craned my aching neck upward and stared in horror. Oh no! Crushed like a soda can, the gunner's perch sagged toward the road, its metal supports ripped apart by the grenade. Most of the few rangers atop had jumped to safety on the deck, but one hadn't managed to dismount. I watched in gut-wrenching fear as a thin figure with red hair peeking out from under her helmet wrapped both arms around the ruined perch with all her might. Her face pale with panic, Jessica Morgan kicked desperately to climb onto the lower framework, but the rest of the metal had already begun to give way. The tips of her boots skipped over the road, and her pleading chestnut-brown eyes met mine. Covering fire! I scrambled toward her on all fours, my voice high-pitched, and renewed fear surged through my veins. Guns barked, and bullets ricocheted off the fire-blackened hood of the Chevy as it battered the warped perch from the opposite side, Jessica just out of reach. With trembling limbs, I threw myself onto the ruined superstructure and climbed hand over hand down the struts. 13-year-old Jessica Morgan had been one of the many children I helped escape from the military zone in the city of Black Oak. Her older sister, Hannah, had entrusted Jessica's safety to me. While not all those I'd led to New Wilderness became members of 4th Platoon, Jessica had stuck with me from day one, and I'd come to see her like a sister. Seeing her there, hanging by a thread, made my heart stop. I couldn't lose her, not like this. How could I face Hannah? How could I look at myself in the mirror? Pull me up, please! Jessica's hands slid on the rusted struts, but each movement only bent the angle iron more, inching her closer to doom. Hold on! Instinctively, I tried to crawl across the ladder to her, but even with my slender frame, it was too much weight on the fragile supports. "Just hold on, I'll get you. Stay still." Despite my words, I realized there was no way to reach her from the deck. She hung too far out of reach for me to reel her in with a lance pole or a rope, and my mind raced desperately for a solution that wouldn't come. With tightening lungs, I backed up onto the trailer and searched for something, anything, to save her. Creak, creak, crunch. My mouth fell open, and Jessica's expression sank in despair. The tower struts groaned, and before I could react, the weakened structure gave way. No. Time slowed, and I couldn't hear myself call her name, couldn't feel the wind, smell the burnt rubber, or taste the sour gunpowder residue between my teeth. Jessica tumbled downward, and the red pickup shoved its way under the falling gunner's perch to ram into the back of the trailer once more. Thud. 2 worn boot heels flew into the air, and Jessica hurtled into the moldy bed of the red Auto Stalker, landing so hard I heard her steel helmet clunk off the floor. The mutant seemed to sense something on its back and writhed like a bucking bronco. Under this assault, the remnants of the gunner's perch tore free, and in the next second, the horde of oncoming mutants smashed it flat with a squeal of rattling metal. Like a pinball in a machine, Jessica bounced around in the back of the rusty red pickup, her body limp, and the indecision inside me snapped. "This is going to hurt." Teeth clenched, I backed up a few steps and sprinted to the end of the trailer. Icy wind pushed me into the air, the pulse thundering in my temple, and I soared over the spinning asphalt as the rest of the crew panicked over the radio. Whack! Sharp pain shot through the arches of my feet, and I landed in the peeling metal of the pickup truck's bed, missing the tailgate by inches. Its strap tangled around my shoulder. The Type 9 wedged itself against my right armpit in a tight knot. Around us, the world blurred into a sea of melted colors as the rig sped away, and I tried to steady myself, but the beast tossed me side to side, the rusted steel battering me mercilessly. "I'm going to die." With a hard jerk, the radio headset swung loose around my neck, my elbow smashed into the corner of the truck bed until my arm went numb, and the herd surrounded us, causing me to lose sight of the convoy. My lips tasted metallic blood, and I wanted to vomit from the constant spinning, but the terror coursing through my veins kept me grounded. "Please, I don't want to, not yet." Pressing my legs against the cold rails of the truck bed, I managed to grab Jessica by the leather war belt around her waist and dragged her to me. She didn't move, blood streaming from her nose, but neither of us could do much as the other Auto Stalkers slammed into the old pickup in their stampede to surge past us. I hooked a small carabiner on my belt into a loop on hers, and did my best to cushion Jessica's head from any further impacts, though my own body took a terrible beating. Despite my efforts, I couldn't reach either of my guns or even my knife. Not that it would have helped against the machinery of the Auto Stalker. My mind spun with a dozen fractured thoughts, and for a brief moment, Alex's loving smile flashed before my eyes. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Under my bruised spine, the pickup rattled over thick underbrush, and a wall of dripping evergreen trees closed in. Wham! Something struck the beast squarely in the middle, the rusty sheet metal crumpled, and the Auto Stalker tumbled end over end, burying us both in darkness. The Auto Stalker toppled onto its side, with a piercing screech of twisting metal, and I squeezed my eyes shut, holding Megan tightly as she lay unconscious in my arms. Splat! Sloppy mud cushioned my fall, and the truck flipped over, trapping us inside like a trash can lid. My head throbbed painfully. The submachine gun jabbed my ribs with such force I feared they might shatter, and something hard beneath me made my back protest. Branches snapped from the rollover, twigs scattered onto the underside of the disabled pickup, and a new sound sliced through the crisp air. A deep, menacing growl. I blinked, lying in the darkness of the truck bed, with only a few slivers of light filtering through the muck on either side, and caught a fleeting glimpse of gray moving outside. My blood ran cold as I struggled to draw breath into my aching lungs. So, that's what you were running from. Even with my limited view, I could recognize the slick gray skin anywhere, paired with a crocodile-like lower jaw on a log-shaped head, and several yellowed teeth jutting out like steak knives. These creatures were pure nightmares, whispered about in hushed tones by our guards even within the safety of our stronghold. Powerful hunters, intelligent, and blisteringly fast. Fast enough to make a herd of Auto Stalkers scatter in blind panic. Long, black claws clamped onto the side of the truck just inches from my grimy face, and the upside-down Auto Stalker emitted a painful horn blast as invisible jaws tore into its exposed metal belly. Sinews squelched and popped, rubbery flesh was crushed between teeth, and thick dribbles of an off-orange fluid began to ooze through the rusted holes in the truck bed, the lifeblood of a sunlight-adapted techno. The predators outside were gnawing on the alien meat hidden beneath the charred hood of the overturned red pickup, and more clawed beasts crept closer across the mud as the rest of the Auto Stalker herd fled into the distance. Birch Crawlers. From where I huddled in the cold muck, I could smell their foul breath, hear their chittering reptilian grunts, and sense their triumphant glee as they tore at the truck above us. Mutants preyed on each other for sustenance, but wouldn't pass up a chance for a crunchy human if given the opportunity. If they flipped the truck for any reason, the beasts would be right on top of us. Heart pounding, I crawled on my side with Megan in tow until I reached the back of the truck bed and fumbled for my pistol with my numb arm. Above me, the chewing stopped, and a muffled sniff made my pulse race in my ears. They know. Born without eyes, Birch Crawlers were still top-tier predators, and some of the fiercest organics in the zone. Their log-shaped, twig-fringed heads housed enough sensory glands to detect the pheromones released by a fearful animal, and their smooth skin could sense the slightest movement on the ground. Strong as a gorilla and fast as a horse, they could only be taken down by a barrage of well-aimed bullets, and in the cramped wreck of the Auto Stalker, my Type 9 lay stuck behind my shoulder blade. Even if I could unload my handgun on the first one, it wouldn't be enough to handle an entire pack of these monsters, and from what I could tell, there were easily 4 or 5 out there. I had only one option left, and it almost scared me more than the mutants did. Almost. A row of jagged yellow teeth came into view, the red gums in between indicating another sunlight-adapted mutant. They were all slowly shedding their nocturnal restraints, and would soon spill into the wider world. Not all survived their first step into the sunshine, but enough did, and this one had passed that biological test. I could feel the hunger in its throaty growl, the anticipation in how its foreclaws twitched, another valuable kill ripe for the taking. They probably had young somewhere, little ones that needed feeding, and I would make a nice addition to their food pile. Holstering my pistol, I slid my dirty palms over Megan's ears, and forced myself to breathe more slowly. I couldn't run, had no hope of resisting for more than a few seconds, but I refused to go down without a fight. Unlike the Auto Stalker, I wasn't some mindless feeder this thing could devour without consequence. If the beasts wanted my flesh, they'd have to earn it, because I wasn't as human as they thought. I licked my dry lips, tasted metallic blood, and clenched my teeth. All right then, freak show, you leave me no choice. Both my eyes drifted shut even as the truck bed lifted away, ignoring the sickly sweet breath that blew hot against my face. Every muscle relaxed, and I focused all my remaining energy on concentration, the prehistoric teeth poised on either side of my head, death a hair's breadth away. Every fiber of my body vibrated, my skin wriggled, and the blood burned in my veins like fire. Sockets popped under my ears, tendons in my face stretched, and a powerful foreign energy surged from deep within as the focus took over. My jaw extended, each lung expanded, and like a bomb, I erupted with a high, piercing scream that tore the air apart. In my mind's eye, I saw the road from countless visions before, a rain-soaked gravel path stretching endlessly through the darkness between dripping trees. Cold rain kissed my skin, thick clay earth squished between my bare hands and feet, and thunder above sounded like cathedral bells. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a shadow against the dreamlike horizon, a tall, lumbering figure that sent whispers coursing through my brain. As the long, alien screech reached its peak, a single bolt of lightning cut through the otherworldly memory, and the forest around me fell into eerie silence. Crunch. Unsure how much time had passed, I tilted my head to one side, eyes still closed, my energy sapped from the scream. Static buzzed in my skull, my pulse pounded, and I fought the overwhelming urge to pass out. Like a statue, I seemed frozen in the seated position I'd taken, rubbery and numb from the sheer exertion of the past 5 minutes. This always happened, a constant side effect of my unusual abilities, and the main reason I hadn't dared to use them in defense of the convoy. The sound could easily burst eardrums, make someone pass out, or even kill them, but never before had anything dared to approach after I'd unleashed one of my screams. Crunch. Despite the ringing deep in my ears, my extra-sensitive hearing picked up footsteps not far to my left, a pair of bipedal steps that trampled the underbrush with slow, deliberate motion. Could they be human? I didn't need to reach for Megan to know it wasn't her. She lay by my side, her unmoving head resting against my right thigh. No, it had to be someone else, and from the way they moved, I decided they couldn't be one of our rangers coming to rescue me. Crunch. Deep inside, the sharp voice of common sense urged me to run, to open my eyes, to see what was so close it could have touched me, but my body still refused to fully awaken. I'd pushed myself too far this time, feeling it in my joints, muscles, and lungs. I'd only used the scream a few times before, and even then, never with such intensity. It occurred to me that it would be a tragic irony if I died from my own desperate attempts at survival, and alongside that thought came a chilling realization. What if I knew exactly who was standing not 6 feet in front of me in the autumn muck? The footsteps stopped, and my weary heart skipped a terrified beat. There's still too much light. It can't be him. Heavy boot soles creaked, and someone crouched down to be face level with me. My foggy mind registered the sensation of a pair of eyes staring at my haggard face, sending a river of cold adrenaline down my spine. There was no mistaking it. He was there, had been there all along, waiting until I was too weak to fight. I'd given him the perfect opportunity, immobilized myself, and now I struggled with ragged despair against my exhausted paralysis. Something solid and heavy settled in my lap, placed there by unseen hands, and I tensed, anticipating the inevitable. With how vulnerable I was in this half-sedated state, Tyler couldn't possibly pass up the chance to finish what he'd started weeks ago. Surely he saw my newfound life as an insult to his power, the silver tattoos covering my scars a taunt, the streaks of honey yellow in my hair a challenge, and the semi-luminescent gold in my eyes enough to incite abyssal rage in the name of his dark god. It was his fault I'd ended up like this in the first place. It had been by Tyler's cruel wooden blade that I ceased to be fully human. V-room. Somewhere in the distance, engines roared, growing closer by the second. The boots in front of me shuffled through the carpet of churned clay and wet leaves and tramped away into the forest. I couldn't even gasp in confusion before they were gone, leaving me alone in bewildered silence. What just happened? As if on cue, Megan's head stirred from her place on my hip, and she let out a small grunt of pain. Where are we? A dam broke loose in my head, dizziness swamped my brain with a wave of static, and I gasped for air. It took a monumental effort to open my eyes, but I found myself staring up at the red, orange, and pink streaks of sunset and a red-haired figure peering at me with concern. Gotta move. I pushed the words through clenched teeth and dragged myself to my feet, head spinning. Can't stay here past dark. You okay? Truth be told, Megan looked about as bad as I felt. Having removed the steel helmet issued to our recruits from the old militia stockpiles of New Wilderness, her crimson hair was tangled around her pale face. Darker red blood coated her lips from where it had dripped out of her nose, and she had a nasty bruise forming under her right eye. Mud, pine needles, and dead leaves smeared the forest green uniform jacket that the women of Ark River had worked hard to create, intended to replace our old New Wilderness polo shirts with something more practical. One of her boots was untied, and Megan's rank patch on her right arm, a single brown chevron stitched to the fabric, had torn enough that it needed mending. Megan lifted her olive green helmet to examine a large dent in the back with wide brown eyes. I think so. My head hurts, though. Can you check and see if my brains are coming out? At that, a tiny ghost of a smile crept across my face. Megan had come a long way from the sulking 13-year-old who left Black Oak, and at times I almost forgot she was 7 years my junior. So many in our force now were people who wouldn't have legally been able to buy a beer in the normal world, but carried rifles in a war most adults hadn't survived. It was cruel in some ways that their childhoods had been stolen from them, but I suppose it was better than dying with the thousands who fell in the early days of the breach. Instead of school field trips, she'd remember raids on trenches. Crazy. What a crazy world we lived in. Turning her around, I felt the back of her ruddy head for any soft spots and gave Megan a small pat on the shoulder. You're fine. If your brains were coming out, you wouldn't be standing, much less talking. That's why we wear the dorky helmets. At that, Megan made a sheepish, red-faced grin and blinked at the chaos around her. Yeah, I guess so. Thanks for coming back for me. I thought I was a goner. You and me both, kid. The red Auto Stalker lay on its side a few feet away, the metal body shredded like a potato chip bag, glass shattered into tiny crystalline bits, and the engine compartment a mess of greasy brown sinew. All the freaks had some level of mutated black tissue holding them together at their core, either plant-based or animal-based. Like most other species, when they adapted to sunlight, their color changed to become healthier and more docile. Granted, docile for mutants often just meant slightly less aggressive, but since the forests were crawling with them, we would take any break we could get. Relieved to be in one piece, I stepped forward, only to have my foot kick something solid. Looking down, I frowned at a square object wrapped tightly in dead leaves. What the? Ice tingled through my veins once more, and the strange footsteps echoed in my mind, reminding me that even with the mutants gone, we still weren't safe. Bending into a stiff crouch, I scooped the object up and peeled away the leaves, unleashing a horrible stench of wood rot, mold, and damp earth. Megan covered her nose with one hand and coughed at the smell, but inched closer to peer over my shoulder. Where did that come from? Puzzled, I didn't answer and narrowed my eyes at the strange new thing in my hands. It was a book, old and decayed, with a stiff cover that seemed to be made of some rough leather. Something about it made my skin crawl, the scars under my tattoos wriggled in disgust, and I wanted nothing more than to throw it as far from me as possible. However, against my better judgment, I pushed the dead leaf wrappings aside and pried the cover open. Thick, musty paper was covered with rusty red markings and sharp, jagged clusters. In long rows of frenzied scribbles, they spanned the page from top to bottom with no discernible pattern. They didn't resemble any language I'd ever seen before. The figures looked more like spider webs than anything else. For some reason, the ink color made my stomach churn, and the more I squinted at the odd writing, strange whispers arose in the back of my head like ghosts on the wind. My fingertips brushed over the dried red ink, and I went rigid in an instant as a dry whisper echoed right in my ear. Lost, lost, lost. Without my prompting, the focus settled inside my head, sharpening all my senses and swirling my mind into a cacophony of strange emotions. The tangled scribbles seemed to unravel before me, and I found my eyes widening in shock at the cold words that echoed in my mind like footsteps in a flagstone hallway. I have been chosen. The pain is immense, but from it I will rise to new life. This old form I cast aside with glee, for I know the future awaits my exaltation. I am a servant of the one who called me from the clutches of death, the eye of the void, who seeks to bring about his great conquest. Even now, the sky draws close, the shadows embrace me, and I shed my blood to capture the true essence of this moment. I will awaken the Master. I will resurrect the broken vessel of the Nameless One, and line his path to the gates of this corrupted world with the bodies of his scattered children. I will answer my calling with joy on the road to the sacred grove. Megan? Her voice seemed distant, muffled, as if she were standing behind a closed door. What's wrong? What is that thing? Frozen in place, I forced each breath in and out of my sore chest, my heart racing with the terrified realization of what I held. This thing was evil, a word I hadn't given much thought to during my old life in Louisville, but one that now twisted a sickened knot in my guts in this new life I'd found here in Barron County. For I knew those words, recognized some of them, and recalled the visceral hate with which they were spoken aloud. You think you've won? You cannot hide. Your world will fall. A warning. Snapped out of my trance, I shuddered at my own raspy tone, and another cold breeze rose in the air like the chuckle of a cruel voice from the frigid sky. This was done on purpose, the stampede, the crawlers, all of it. Only one person could have written this. Who? Megan glanced around the trees, fear in her eyes, and reached for her war belt to find a stubby knife I'd given her. Beneath the silvery ink of my tattoos, the scars ached with phantom movements, and I glared at the darkened trees with growing apprehension. In the distance, the engines of our backup roared closer. The Auto Stalker herd honked their aged car horns from some new grazing area, and the Birch Crawlers were nowhere to be seen, but none of it comforted me. The sun sank low on the horizon, almost out of sight, and we still had several miles to cover before we were safely across the ridgeline and into friendly territory. Even then, nowhere was safe after dark. Eyes locked on the murky shadows of the forest, I let the cursed name slip off my tongue like it was bile, and instinctively reached for my Type 9. Derek.